Hi, I'm Rachel Ash, and I'm known on my various social media resources as Rachel Keenes. Today, we're going to talk about a shirt. This shirt, but ultimately a better version of this shirt. My son had prom not too long ago, and at the last minute, he and I came up with a design for a shirt, and this is the result. And since it was last minute, we used whatever was in my stash, which was this $2 fabric. I have lots of regrets, but lots of learning moments, and I'm using that to create a much better version of this shirt. So that's what we're doing together today, is we are making the better version of this shirt, which will be a really cool modern men's shirt that can be worn by anyone to their prom, in case you want something a little more special than a normal white Oxford. So hang out, we'll talk about what I learned, the tears I cried, and hopefully you'll get a great pattern out of this as well. There's so much and so little to say about this section at the same time. So I'm going to say both or not. I'm not really sure which way to put this. What I'm going to say is this fabric had been reliable for me in the past. I had ordered the same stuff from the same store in a different color, and I had made a full skirt and a bolero out of it, and it had worked fine. So I had no idea that it was going to be quite the poor quality that it turned out to be. That's my only defense. I did know it was $2 fabric. I did know. I did not know it was going to be so bad, but it really was. The positives I can give you is I did know what I was doing. I've made these shirts before. So I had a working pattern to go with. I had working knowledge to go with. I had just made some alterations to make it a more cute idea, and we loved the idea of it being sheer to kind of play with something a little bit more interesting. But that was, that was the only alteration, so it was going to be a little bit, fun and easy. It should have been a one-night project, but it wasn't. The fabric kept making it really hard. It was hard to cut out. I had to cut it out on top of the pattern just to have some control. It was hard to sew. I had to make the collar twice because the first time I turned it right side out, the corners popped open. I had to be really careful when I worked on the seams because they kept trying to split on me. I had to do so much to try to make sure that this pattern did not fall apart on me, and it was the most insane thing. So something that should have been a quick, easy sew became laborious and taxing and was taking so long, and it was so surprisingly difficult because it really should have been an easy one night sew, and it suddenly wasn't. So all of a sudden, I was worried that I wasn't going to get it done on time. So I'm going to let you just watch what little is left of the footage, uninterrupted by my sadness and desperation. But at one point, I just stopped filming because I ran out of the energy to film. I was desperate to finish because prom was coming up, and I didn't know if I was going to get the shirt done and if my son was going to be shirtless for prom, which I was pretty sure he wouldn't get by with. We were already pushing the limits by having a sheer shirt. Enjoy the rest of my mistakes. I'll catch you after, and we will sew my new and improved shirt together. The one thing I did right is I made the sleeve pattern. I got one of my son's old shirts that he was getting rid of, and I grabbed the sleeve off of it and I took it apart, and I liked it because I know this sleeve fits. It's long enough. It fits his arm right. It's a good tightness for his arm. And then I cut it up the middle about to where I wanted to start the modification. So a little above his elbow. And I split it, and I wanted a 2-part split. And the reason why I wanted a 2-part split is I didn't want to make a flat addition to the poofiness. I actually wanted a very specific setup. My goal here is to make a 2-part poof to the sleeve. That sounds kind of funny, but I wanted one poof that was one level of fullness and then a second level of fullness that was even fuller up by the shoulder. I pinned it at one point up above, like in between the midpoint between the elbow and the shoulder, and that is split at one level here to create one level of poof right there. So I'll have basically an elastic around the elbow or a little above the elbow, and then I'm going to, and this one's harder to do as you can see, and create a smooth line. I really want a smooth line there because that lets me know that all of this is going to lay right when I create the sleeve itself. And then I want to create just a little bit more fullness when I get it up by the sleeve, up by the shoulder. So I pulled it a little bit wider up by the shoulder. I still wanted it to lay right because, again, you want your fabric to have the right lines. And the whole point of doing this with a pre-made sleeve is to make sure that it has the correct sleeve slope and shoulder lines. So I took the sleeve, I split it, and now it's going to have that extra fullness in the shoulder and extra fullness in the arm, and I'll have that 2-part gathering when I make the final sleeve. So I did this when I did the initial shirt, and it was the one thing that I did that I was able to carry over into the next one. I mean, I don't want to say it's the one thing I did right because that's not fair. I did a lot of things right. It was just with the wrong fabric. But it definitely is the one thing that I was like, hey, I can carry this over specifically. And I was really excited to have something that I could carry over. So now what I'm doing is just tracing around these new lines that I can create around the sleeve. So I'm took all of that. I need to, after I get rid of this old sleeve, I'm going to be able to take the line across, make a line across where I left the gap, and then I will need to true up the lines, which is what I'm going to do, and then I will need to make a seam line. And I feel really bad about this, so I wanted a French curve for the longest time because I knew that would make it easier to true up seams and it would make the curves just so much more perfect. But by the time I got a French curve, I was so used to doing everything with my quilting ruler that and eyeballing the curves basically, that I just don't use it. It's like one more thing to get out. So I just use my quilting ruler, and I feel bad about it because I have this French curve and it just stays put up all the time. So I have a French curve. I just don't ever use it. And yeah, I don't have a good excuse. So anyway, I'm finishing up the seam line, and then that's really it. I'll keep this in its muslin form, and now that I have this sleeve pattern basically forever for these fuller sleeves whenever I want it. now I have organza silk, real silk, not polyester this time. And the difference is night and day, as you can see, because if you look at that, you can't see through it. It's not perfectly sheer. And the difference in working with it, you're going to be able to tell, is a world of difference as well. I'm not worried about this one falling apart, although I was very careful in the sewing still. I'm going to be honest, sewing this was really anxiety driven for me because I had such a bad experience. So instead of it taking it in one night, which it really still should have done, it took me quite a while because I would do a little bit and then I would just put it away. But I got it done, and now my son has a permanent, beautiful piece to go with his wardrobe. Cutting this out is nice. One of the wonderful things about working with real silk is that it's really wonderful, and as I've gotten the budget to work with real silk, I've been really excited and feel very fortunate to do so. If you do not yet have the budget to work with real silk, I feel you and I get it. What I will tell you is that I got this from Dharma Trading, which is one of the less expensive real silk options, and I will be linking them in the description below. So if you want the chance to order less expensive silk organza, you will have the chance to order from them. I love pleats, so that was definitely going to happen. Here I'm using the ability of silk organza that is better than poly organza, which is the ability to tear along the wefts. So I did a cut and then I just tore and I get this wonderful clean straight line, and this let me make sure that both sides of the shirt would have even pleats that are exactly symmetrical. And now I have these wonderful even pleating lines that I can do. The first step I needed to do was to hem both sides. So I did my secret lazy hemming, which is when I don't want to measure it all out, I just sew along about 1/8 of an inch along the edge, and then that marks where I need to iron. The next step is to take it to the ironing board and fold it up along where I sewed and iron along that seam. Organza is really, really good at ironing. In fact, it presses so easily that you can finger press it. And you can iron silk as long as you keep it on the lowest setting. I set mine at 1. After you iron the first round, you fold it over one more time and you iron again, and that gets you a nice 1/4 inch hem, which is what I was going for this. As you can see, I'm starting by finger pressing it before I pull out the iron. Then you go back and you carefully sew all the edges together. Here is my favorite part. I created a pleating board for this and for my Rococo Peach, and I used it to death. In fact, I have to make a new one. I will link a tutorial in the description, but a pleating board is a magical device that makes pleating evenly so much easier. And I actually wasn't even good at pleating yet. This was my first time to ever use the pleating board. I got so much better at it after doing the massive amounts of pleats that I did for Rococo Peach. But once you get them positioned, you press down with your iron and get those pleats heated in. You can do it with steam, which is what destroys the pleating board. And then you press them down. I did not use steam I almost never use steam on silk because it's silk. And then you hold it down. If you're smart, you don't hold it down with your own hands. I am not smart. I have been ironing for sewing for a while. I have used my hands the entire time. My hands are now immune mostly to the pain that causes. And I can just put my hands down and hold it with my own skin to the heat the whole time. If you're smart though, you don't do that. You can use so many other things. You can use a nearby book. You can use fabric. You can use random weights. You can use your ironing hand. You can use, they actually have wood blocks that are made for this purpose. You can use so many other things than your own poor skin to hold down the fabric that you've ironed into specific shapes. However, I was not smart when I started this, and my hands are basically immune to it. What it does do is it makes sure that the fabric gets trained into position, and that's really important. So once you do that, you hold it till it cools off with hopefully not your hands, and you get these beautiful, really, really sharp pleats. They are so lovely. Look at those wonderful sharp pleats that you get out of this. The next thing I did after I pleated all this fabric into 1/3, because I did 1/2 inches folded under with a whole inch underneath, so it basically took the fabric and reduced it by 1/3. So after that, I secured it with a running stitch to make sure that the pleats would not get lost when they sit for a while until I was ready to secure the pleats to the front of the shirt. It's just a good idea to do that. You don't want them to fall apart. You want them to stay really healthy and in the right shape. Then I ironed them for just a little bit more training, and the entire thing was finished. I was really excited. I thought the pleats came out quite lovely, and I have wonderful sheer pleats to put on the front of the shirt. At this point, it was time to add the yoke to the back panel of the shirt. The back panel is basically one flat panel of fabric, and I matched the center of the yoke pieces, which is 2 pieces of fabric, so I could sandwich the back panel in between them. I'm matching the centers, and that's my first step. And then I'm using that as the basis to pleat the back panel to make a little room, a little like movement room once the shirt's complete. And I would say that I measured it out all wonderfully, but I kind of eyeballed it after I had the centers matched. So I made sure that it started at the same point on each side, and I just sort of went to where the fabric stopped on each side. So that's what I did to make the pleat. Once the fabric was sandwiched, it was time to sew it together. And then I turned it right side out and sewed another line to complete the connection between the yoke and the back panel. And this not only strengthens it, but it also just adds a really nice touch to the appearance of the garment. Now I start the front panels. Eventually, We're getting there. You guys really get like the cut down version of these episodes, and let me tell you, I am finicky. I am so finicky. I am so picky. Also, I had a lot of trouble with, remember this is, my original garment was a bit of a mess, especially because I started rushing at the end, and my plackets on those panels were not even, and I was determined they would be even on this. There's nothing worse than uneven plackets on a sheer shirt. So I was so careful that you are seeing me take forever to start, but then I started. So finally I started going. So the first step is just to attach the placket straight up to the front panel. So that's what I'm doing. So each front panel I'm just attaching a placket, and again I was just trying to make sure that I did not get them uneven. You're seeing the video all put together into one thing, but I took like weeks to finish a shirt that should have taken a day or two, because I was so upset after dealing with the first one that I would get one part done and then I'd just go take a break and do something else. But there you go, it's sewn. And that's the first step. Next is ironing. Ironing is a major part of any good sewing project. And in this case, ironing silk, you can always do, but you just need to make sure it's on a low setting. And I may have said that in this video already. I'm actually not sure. But if you've heard it once, you can hear it again because it's so important. Ironing is important, and you can iron silk. You just have to iron it at a low setting. So then I fold the placket back, and I did a lot of finger pressing so that I could iron as perfectly as possible, and then I would follow my finger pressing with the iron. And again, this partly is because it was organza. You can see through everything, so like, it's usually important to try to iron precisely, but then when everybody can see every move you've made, it's extra important to iron precisely. So I ironed as precisely as possible. After ironing it open, basically, then I folded it over, finger pressed, and ironed it closed. Then the last step for the ironing process of this placket was to fold it over one more time so that I could have a hem to sew. This little board you're seeing here is something I created back when I was doing pleats by hand before I created a pleating board. And I just have a bunch of measurements that I traced on it. This thing I think is years old. And then I just sewed a line to attach that placket down and have a nice edge. Now I am attaching the buttonholes, and hilariously, you see the pins. The pins told me where to sew, but I was also paranoid. So I also measured every time. I wanted to make sure it turned out right. I was really worried. I am not kidding when I say that I was upset after that first shirt. But now it's time to sew down the beautiful, heartwarming pleats. I just love pleats. I'm not gonna lie, like they are one of my favorite things. In fact, currently I love Robert Woon. He is a designer I follow on Instagram, and he is so good. His pleats are so beautiful. They're well beyond anything I'm doing. You should check him out. And then once the pleats are done, I'm attaching the shoulders. So the pleats are done. The front, basically all of the planes of the shirt are done. So it's now just about attaching those planes to each other. So once those shoulders are attached, I am folding them over, and those seams over each other, and I am felling them down. And that just basically means that you fold the seams inside the fabric and trap them in there, and that makes for a really clean final product. And actually, the shoulders were my least clean felled seams, I'm going to be honest, and that has to do with the fact they were the first ones I did with this fabric, and there's always a period of getting to know your fabric when you're doing anything. sleeves. I'm always scared of sleeves, not gonna lie. But I did get to put off starting the sleeve part of sleeves by first having to figure out how to do the elastic part of these sleeves. I needed to figure out how to gather them, both at the mid bicep and then right above the elbow. And the only way I could figure out to do that eventually, to make sure they were still comfortable, could still be worn and still be used and not be something that my son absolutely had to hold still for, was to create other organza sleeves or pockets or tubes. We'll go with tubes. Organza tubes, which I did out of scrap organza I had left over from all the pieces that I had cut. I sewed them in each spot that I needed. I ironed them up so that they would cover where I had sewn, and then I measured out the width of the elastic that I was going to do by literally just putting the elastic in place, rolling it into the organza, because I am a practical person and wanted it to fit exactly, and then ironing it in that spot so that the organza would be correct. And that's literally what I did. Then I trimmed down the organza so that it would be correct and made sure that I wouldn't have extra organza, and then I ironed everything down into place. And then I very carefully sewed the edge of that tube, I remembered tube, and got ready to put the elastic through. Using the time and age honored method of sticking a safety pin, I don't have any cool trick here. I've tried some of the cool tricks, they never work for me. I'm so glad for other people that they do. But I had to have a safety pin, and I had to have a small one because it couldn't be thicker than the elastic that I was threading through, which actually took a little time. I had to go find one. To do this, if you've never done this, basically you attach a safety pin. Make sure you've got enough of the fabric or the cord, or in this case elastic, that it's not going to be ripped by the safety pin. And then you literally push the safety pin through as far as you can, and then hold the safety pin hostage while you pull the fabric further down. And you do this over and over again. And then when you get to where the end of, in this case, elastic is getting to the end of the tube, you fasten that so that it doesn't get just pulled through, and then you've basically just pointlessly pulled elastic through a tube of fabric and got nowhere. Then I found my safety pin again and continued on. Again, it's not the fastest thing, but I've done it for so many years that it's not a big hassle for me either. I just do it. And I think about my goal, which is to have these really cool poofy sleeves. Then I went ahead and unhooked my safety pin, and I will be pinning the other end so that it's ready to go. And I did that 3 more times for the other elastic tubes on the sleeves. I was really careful about the placement of this. I made sure that they had shorter spacing on the inside of the arm and bigger spacing on the outside of the arm, so there'd be maximum poof potential. And I also measured them to my son's arms so that they would be placed right in the middle of his bicep, right above his elbow. So I would love to give you an actual pattern for this, but I don't have one. I'm thinking about how to do patterns. I drape so much. So this is where I attach the sleeves. I'm doing since it's a single pattern, a single piece sleeve, I'm doing a method that I know, which is that you just attach the sleeve to the garment first, and then you sew up the sides of the garment and the sleeve, which is a much easier approach and if you don't have a 2-piece sleeve, there's no reason not to do this approach. It's just so much easier. I did gather everything at the top of the shoulder. You can see it's already creating a lot of great poof at the top, which is a technical term, I believe. So just so you know, poof.
And then one of the things I figured out with the organza after the shoulder flat felled seams gave me heartburn is that if you go ahead and create a French seam first, which is to sew the seams together, turn them inside out, and sew them together again, which you're seeing me do that part right now, then you get a great, you get a much better flat-felled seam, because organza just fights in a different way. There's a lot of fabrics I don't do that with, because that's like a third step for a flat-felled seam, and there's no reason to do that with a regular cotton or a poplin or anything like that, which is a cotton. I don't bother with that because you can iron everything into place and it lays really beautifully. But with this, I really had to. So that is why I first did a French seam. And now you see me sewing the sides into place. So I did the attachment of the shoulder seams and the sleeves, and now I'm going to sew all the way up the side and all the way down the edge of the arm. And again, you see me doing the second stage of the French seam. And the reason why is it just was easier to do a flat felled seam this way. I like the look of a flat felled seam, and part of the fun of doing this all in organza is to have like this kind of traditionally constructed shirt, but have it be sheer. Well, it doesn't look traditionally constructed as much if you don't have those traditional flat felled seams. So I was really going for that. And the first step, again, with organza, it just made it a lot easier if you did the French seam. So here I'm showing you, this is the inside of the French seam, and all of the edges, raw edges, are contained in that pocket of the French seam. But then when you have the outside, you have eventually, when I move the pleats out of the way, there you go, you have a closed seam. And once I lay that seam down and fell it, it will look like a nice felled seam. So that's what we do. For this particular shirt, for two reasons, I didn't fell the sleeves. I only felled the sides. The sides still gave it that traditional look, but the sleeves were going to be more difficult to fell. I could do it. I've done it before, but I didn't feel like it. And I was worried about whether that would actually be too much bulk under the elastic on the sleeves. And what I didn't want to do is make that elastic section uncomfortable. So I decided to leave the sleeves just to be a regular French seam. So I just basically felled up the sides up to where the sleeve ends and called it good for putting the body of the shirt together.
Now that the sleeves are all created and attached to the body, it's time to create some sort of placket or edge for the sleeves leading up to the cuff. And honestly, I was really at a loss here because there are a lot of ways that this is done in traditional shirts, and the most common way is binding. But I couldn't, this is what you're seeing is actually my third solution for this. My first couple did not go well. I did attempt to create an organza binding and I hated the way it looked. And finally, I just decided to hand roll a little tiny hem, and that really worked better. So you're seeing me do that now. I hand rolled this little tiny hem and finger pressed it, and that ended up looking a lot cleaner. That matters because you can see all the mistakes in organza. After I finger pressed it and pinned it, then it was time to sew it. Luckily, sewing is generally where I feel a lot more confident because I can sew a straight line. I'm pretty good at that one. So the interesting thing is figuring out how to make sure that I taper it down just right so that it captures the most amount of raw edge, because it did taper down to the point. And then, of course, the other side would taper as well. But I came up with a pretty good solution for that once I got both sides sewn down on the hem. So once I had both sides sewn down, I ended up deciding that the best solution was to sew a diagonal piece across, a diagonal seam across the sewn hems. And it's something that I've seen them do in bindings on jeans and a few other things in different like professional clothing. So it just seemed like a way to deal with finishing off the binding on these raw edges, to make sure not only that it doesn't undo itself, but also to reinforce this edge, because really all these seams are coming together in this triangular space, and I just wanted to make sure that this edge doesn't get too much strain. So this was a way of really reinforcing that point where that French seam from where the sleeves ended basically got reinforced. The hems on each of those edges got reinforced, and everything just got like a little bit of extra power behind it, so that if they got pulled apart, if the cuffs were undone, they would have a little bit of extra like reinforcement there. So that was my solution, and as you see when it opens up in a second, actually on camera, there it goes, it looks a lot better, and it also makes them lay right. After that, it's just about creating the pocket that is my collar and my cuffs. So I'm only going to show you making the pocket that's the collar, but we'll also make the pocket that's the cuffs. I did it kind of all three in a row. And they are kind of pockets, which is why I called it that. You make a little pocket out of them, and then you turn it right side out. But because it's organza, not just because it's organza, this is actually good practice. After making this, I reduced my stitch length to 1.4 because I don't have a 1.5, really is the only reason. 1.4 millimeters. And I am going to reinforce just the corners. The reason for this is because corners get a lot of pressure when you're first turning them, and they don't have a lot to protect them. Like, you're having to work them really hard to make them real sharp, but they don't have a lot of protection. So if you reinforce them with like this hard stitch length, this tight stitch length, that really helps. So you can see that they're like doubly reinforced right there, and that will make them turn much sharper more safely. Organza's light anyway, so it needs the reinforcement. But when you trim it down, so you see me trimming down the organza so that it turns nicely, and so that, again, you can see everything, right? Because it's organza, so you can see through this. But then here I'm going to clip the corner, so there's less to protect it. And I've actually got a bamboo fabric turner right here, which is really good for turning corners, and it doesn't catch on the fabric, and it sort of helps really protect it. And then I start with finger pressing before I take it to the iron, just to make sure that it's going to lay as best as possible before it gets ironed. And again, I'm doing this with the collar and the cuffs so that they're all ready to go at the same time, because they all have a very similar approach. And since this is my own pattern, I don't have anything telling me what order to do things in, although I'll be honest, even with like professional patterns, I do my own thing a little bit. So there they are, all three things all laid out. And now I'm just going to go in and reinforce these edges by sewing a second seam, and also because it gives that nice professional Oxford-y shirt look to them, and I like it. But because again, organza is a slightly lighter, weaker fabric, I want to do that. Next, I am attaching the cuffs to the sleeve. And this was a little tricky because the sleeves were just a little bit bigger than the cuffs, so that they could pleat a little bit and have a little room to move. But once that was done, the sleeves are basically done. And now I am attaching the collar to something that I don't know the term for, because I'm not actually a tailor. I've learned everything through like working on it myself, or watching Project Runway, or YouTube. So But I matched the center of it, and it's basically there are two, it's whatever that piece is between the collar and the actual shirt. And I have I have centered it, and I'm sandwiching the collar between the two pieces. And something I did that was, I feel, very smart this time is I went ahead and folded down the part that I'm going to need to already be ironed down when I attach this piece to the shirt itself. I wish I had done that with the cuffs, because I had to sort of finagle that part down after I'd already sewn the cuffs together. That was a mistake. So here you see me now doing the actual sandwiching part. But yeah, having pre-ironed, you see that fold? Having pre-ironed that fold in was really great, because when I turned it right side out after sewing these two pieces together, I didn't have to do any new ironing. I just could lay it onto the shirt like you're seeing me do at this point. So now it's about matching these two garments together. And what's cool is this is really the part where it just looks like a shirt now, right? It looks like an Oxford shirt. It is got its connecting pieces. And now here I go, attaching this final piece to the shirt. And this is the point at which it could feasibly be worn, although it's not really finished. But it could feasibly be worn and look like a shirt. You can tell how paranoid I am about something by the number of pins I include when I put it on. If I'm not worried about something moving, there'll be no pins. And if I am worried, there'll be a pin every, I think centimeter I'm seeing here. Like, there are so many pins on this. So, yeah, it's a really exciting moment here, because that is when it looks like a shirt. There's still one really important step to finishing the shirt, which is sewing the hem. Well, and the buttons. The buttons aren't in the video. I'm sorry. I got excited. I finished the buttons and then was like, look, son, I made it. But the hem was done the same way I did the edges on the pleats. So you can go back to that if you need to. But then I'm done. I have a finished shirt. It's so exciting. It's really beautiful. The light plays through it so prettily. And if you look at these details, you can see that it's got exactly the layout that I actually originally planned for with my design. It's got all of the sleeve detailing that I originally wanted. It looks clean and finished because, well, it is. And this fabric is, it's silk organza. It's real silk organza. It is going to not fall apart the moment it gets worn. So it's a real sturdy shirt, and I'm really excited about it. I even had the time to add buttons to it. So it looks just really exciting and well done. And I was able to add like a little bit of extra space in the back so that it will have a little space for my son's shoulders. It's just a better shirt. And in case you've forgotten throughout the video, this is the original shirt. It has a hole because it fell apart during wear, and it was held together by safety pins because of two things. One, I ran out of time because the fabric was so bad that it kept fighting me all the way through the process. And two, we thought, hey, at least they'll look rock and roll, which they did. But to be honest, it was also because I ran out of time. So, but that said, I finally did make the shirt that we had dreamed up together, and I'm really excited about how it has turned out, and I'm going to give it to him and let him have it, and he can wear it all the way throughout his dreams that line ended up awkward. But as much as he wants, because he is a type of kiddo who will wear it to go to class or to a nice event, and I love that about him. So this is it. This is the end. I hope that you got a chance to get something out of this video. I got a chance to redeem myself with making a horrible shirt into a much better shirt. And if you got something out of this and you want to watch more, please hit the subscribe button. Please like this video. You can hit the bell thing and know when my videos come back up. I produce about one a month. Sometime that might go up, but right now I'm still learning the process of creating these videos, and I also have a full-time job, so I try not to push myself too hard. So I will see you again at another video. Bye. Hello.
I'm revoking.
I'm Vicky. Good shirt, bad shirt. Good shirt, bad shirt. Yeah, which did he wear to prom? That heater's taking a second though. Oopie, oopie. It's not gonna turn off. There it goes. It really was like that's the lesson I learned from this. It's like you can't just will a fabric to be better than it is.
Yeah. You were sometimes limited by the fabric you have.
Yeah. That's what your dad was like, why do you keep trying? And I'm like, because it will work. I know it. But it didn't.